بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله المبعوث رحمة للعالمين. I just wanted to clear the air with a public service announcement, just in case people leave ahead of time. And as we've seen, the masjid has put up these signs, and the sign contains an announcement with regard to a program that's supposed to happen this Sunday, the 19th, from 11 to 1:30 p.m. So two sisters from the organization of CARE are going to come and talk about the whole process of change and how to deal with the system that we're living under. Right? So it's subtitled Build Civic Literacy and Confidence while learning how to navigate and influence the local political system that shape your community. I personally think that is very important. And a lot of us that we have comments, some of them are very constructive, and I'll leave aside the whole issue of negative comments. But if we want to be supportive also of people that are involved, especially these sisters, we should participate in these programs and offer the constructive advice, but also to learn as well. You know, that's extremely important that we're not isolated. And we talked about that last session, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was known as Al-Amin. And that name of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that's important for anyone as a parent, as a person that is responsible in any organization, whether the masjid or in the workplace, to be known as someone that is trustworthy and reliable. Right? That's important. Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, had that same quality. And Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, despite the family problems that he had, and he had some serious family problems, not necessarily coming from his father or his parents, but his siblings. His siblings put him in a predicament, in a situation that was extremely problematic. So we get a lot of lessons from that. And so we pause on a moment to reflect on that issue. How it was that Yusuf navigated that. Having family problems, he still had to deal with the reality of surviving and living. And he had to find a place for himself in a society which was not his society, because Yusuf was exiled. But Yusuf gained the reputation of being trustworthy. And his position of influence in the society was extremely impactful, because he, alayhi salatu wasalam, with the position that he had, was impacting the direction of the society economically and, as a consequence, politically as well. And so the same thing with many of us. We're in positions in the workplace, or we take on positions at a civic level, or we are in charge of raising children and so on and so forth. All of that has an impact. So we have to take the amana seriously. And I speak to myself first. We have to take the amana, the trust, the responsibility seriously, right? So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see the same reality. Not all of the books of Seerah outline the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before prophethood with detail, but we see different situations. One of those situations is when the Kaaba was being rebuilt. This was prior to Nubuwwah, prior to prophethood, prior to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam receiving the Quran, which we're going to talk about the experience of the Cave of Hira and how that relates to leadership and how that relates to developing ourselves. Because it's easy to get the details of the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's a lot of effort that has been put into that. But really thinking about it, about that life that we say we model ourselves after, of the leader that we profess allegiance to in the Shahada, right? Thinking about it, we usually don't do, especially for the contemporary age. But going back to the point, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam during that time, not only was he known as Al-Amin, and we pointed to that issue in the past session. Not only was he known as the trustworthy, not only was he known to the society, right? So the same thing we say in our communities that we live in, we can't afford for other people to define who we are. We can't allow for that. If other people define who we are, then they will define how we're treated as well, right? That's important, because in the seerah itself, Quraysh, that's exactly what Quraysh does. They try to redefine who the Prophet is, alayhi salatu wasalam. So when we look, not only was the Prophet engaged in the society, alayhi salatu wasalam, not only was he trustworthy, or the people knew who he was, but the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also has examples of diplomacy, where he brought people together and he reconciled their differences. And we see that in the restructuring of the Kaaba. And we see a similar reality when the Prophet ﷺ establishes Medina. One of the first things that the companions or his disciples or the closest followers do is they try to pull him to one side or another in terms of where he's going to build his house. You know, where is he going to establish himself? Everybody's trying to pull him to their side, right? In other words, they have their lobby, so to speak. They have their interests. And a lot of us are used to that in this society. And so what do? We try to protect our interests against those interests. Well, the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is one in which he attempted to reconcile the interests of the people. See what I'm saying? In rebuilding the Kaaba, one of the tasks was, who will carry the black stone? So that had a lot of significance, because the Kaaba, it had lost the black stone, and then the black stone was returned back to Quraysh. So part of the destruction of the Kaaba and the rebuilding of the Kaaba, or the deterioration of the Kaaba, part of it revolved around, let's place the black stone back in its place. Well, whoever did that was going to have what we call sharaf, the honor. You see what I'm saying? They were going to be preferred. They were going to have a little more status. So the Prophet ﷺ, he understood that reality. So he found a way how it was that he can reconcile between the different tribes. That's extremely important, to have that mentality. It's not a compromise mentality, especially with ourselves as Muslims, right? We have to learn how to reconcile between the elders and the younger generation, between the men and the women, right? Just like we do between our parents and our aunties and our uncles and so on and so forth, and our fathers, and between the different groups that we have, especially different ethnic groups, but not only different ethnic groups, people that have different visions. That probably is the number one issue that we struggle with. But the Prophet ﷺ was very grounded in that reality of how to deal with people. And that's one of the things that we want to take from him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And that concern for people, we pointed to this issue in the last session. And the author of the Rahiq al-Maktoum, he has about a line, no more than a sentence. And that it doesn't also come up in every book of Sirah, in which, and I mentioned this, but I'll mention it again, because for me it's extremely important when we start talking about this issue of retreating. Because the Prophet ﷺ goes to the cave of Hira. But how does he go to the cave of Hira? How does he retreat from everyday life? Does he retreat surrendering because life is so overwhelming? Oh my God, I can't deal with this reality anymore. These people have me to this level. Or does he go understanding that he needs to renew? He's going with this understanding that his people, his society are a mess. Right? And I need some solution. But when he retreats to the cave of Hira, he's retreating and he's going to regroup himself. Some of the scholars, they said that he did some sort of ibadah. How the details of it are not necessarily important, but they say it was maybe patterned after the way of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. But it's very clear that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, was engaged in some sort of process of renewal. How many of you have gone to Hajj, and how many of you have gone to the cave of Hira or been close to it? Can you raise your hands? So not a good amount of people. And the book, the Moon Split, also on YouTube in the current age, you can see the cave of Hira. But more interesting is not only the cave of Hira, is also the mountain. The mountain. Right? And I want us to think about that, because the mountain is overseeing the whole of Mecca, is giving you perspective, the big picture. Not only is it overseeing Mecca, but it has its shelter, its comfort space, safe zone. But also the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going there and is looking at the deeper reality, the creation of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, the universe, the reality of life and death. See what I'm saying? Like, these types of things are important, because what happens when you're in the everyday of life and you're caught up in problems? What somebody give me some sort of response to that. What happens? Respond to that question. It doesn't have to be the right answer, but we need a working answer. Stress is a big one. Okay, let's stay on that one. What happens when we're stressed out? What happens to our emotions? What happens to our thinking? What happens to how we deal with people?
I tend to make like irrational decisions.
Yeah, overreact. Not necessarily be in control of how we're thinking. And
not making right decisions at the moment.
yeah. What about how we treat the people around us?
Harshly.
Yeah, it could be harsh. The danger is, when you start talking about masjid or any organization, that only is going to last for so long. See what I'm saying? You can't run a business on that model. You know what I'm saying? You can't run a business on that model. That stress gets you to the level where you're not doing your business correctly. I mean, think about the whole customer relationship, so to speak. Think about raising a child. When a child is watching us, the way that we deal with stress and anger, what does a child do? Does a child know details to life? Does a child have a lot of experience in life? They're going to what? Yeah, they photocopy. So exactly how our emotions, we're showing our emotions in our thinking process, is exactly what they photocopy. When we talk about sunnah, yes, we have our hadith and so on and so forth, but one of the important things, and we pointed to this, when we talk about sunnah and we talk about the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is because we have a model that we can photocopy. We can see a life. You see what I'm saying? We have an example that, okay, we may not have all the details that a scholar may have, but we can definitely understand the model. We don't need a scholar at that point. In that point, we have the model that's accessible to everybody at that level. That's key, important. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he retreats from the society because it's chaos. That's why it's important to understand Jahiliyyah, to understand that period before. One of the biggest issues, and we still have it in today's time, is the issue of contracts, especially in the economy and so on and so forth. Violation of contract. I mean, the whole world is suffering because of that right now. But not only contracts, the way that people abused each other, the status of people, the issue of the poor, the issue of the rich, how they dealt with things. So the Prophet ﷺ is looking at that. He's looking also at the state of shirk, at the state of people really not knowing what the purpose of life is. He retreats to the cave of Hira. But he retreats to the cave of Hira, not out of despair. He retreats to the cave of Hira, and there's the inclination of what can be done. And the response of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the revelation of the Quran. And so when you look, for instance, the first thing to be revealed, first five ayat of Surah Iqra, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. We mentioned that before. First thing, read, O Prophet, in the name of your Rabb. It's translated as Lord, but the translation doesn't do good. We've mentioned this before, this, as they say, fil iyada ifada, there's benefit in repetition here. Because the word Rabb is very important. The Quran is very choicy. Allah is very particular in the use of words. The word Rabb is that sense that you're taken care of. Is that sense that things have a goal, they're purposeful, there's a direction, right? So that makes all the difference in a world in which what? There's no direction and there's chaos and people. It makes all the difference. That life is meaningful. People may not be on that program. See what I'm saying? But that doesn't mean that life itself is not meaningful. You can go to some of the most violent places in the world, but then when you look at the creation, it's like, subhanAllah. Beautiful beaches. See what I'm saying? The creation of Allah Ta'ala, it points to the reality of the meaning of life. And that's what was there, that visible at the Mount of Hira. Despite what was going on in that city, Mecca, and it was all hectic and crazy, and people were being abused in their shirk, and there's all these problems, in the big picture, the meaning of life. See what I'm saying? Beyond us as human beings, because we're small, we have a limit of time on earth. We have a big impact. We see these fires from Canada, human problems, human errors, how it affects the world, how it affects the environment, how it affects large amount of people. But still human beings in the big picture are minimal. So seeing that big picture and having that confidence that Allah Ta'ala is directing us. Yes, despite whether humans obey or disobey, or whether humans are ideal or not ideal. That cave of Hira experience is extremely important. So Allah Ta'ala, He commands the Prophet ﷺ to read. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. And to be very clear on what is the origin of the human being. And here the word ins is important. Some of the ulama, they point to it. Al-insan is the being that's forgetful. Right? Al-insan is the being that is forgetful. And prophethood is to remind. The Quran is dhikr, is to remind. Human beings need reminder. When we want change, especially with our children, we have to realize, some of us, we get impatient. We say, but I told you, this is the 5th time that I told you. Yes. You see what I'm saying? It's the 5th time, and it may be the 10th or the 20th time, but that's part of being a parent. It's not just going to come like obedience. You see what I'm saying? From the first time in our interaction with our children. Some of them, mashallah, some children may be like that. But as human beings, how often do we disregard Allah Ta'ala? How often are we disobedient to Allah Ta'ala? And we're reminded, and we're given the opportunity, and we're given a chance. See what I'm saying?
So human beings being forgetful. So in Arabic, human being means insan, and it has the same root as forget.
Yes, nisyan. Yes. Yes.
He was named insan because he forgets.
Yes. So it's part of our quality. And thank you for contributing to that, brother. What's your name?
Abdurrahman.
Beautiful name. Jazakumullah khair. Abdurrahman. So the same thing, we want to take a lesson from that, not only just to get information. That understanding of how to deal with people especially parents and children, especially us husbands. We forget a lot of stuff. So that's important because it gives us a little bit of patience in understanding the nature of people, right? That it takes some time to be reminded. And leadership is about that. Leadership, you have to be on top of things. Anybody that does business knows that. You have to be on top of things. If you're not on top of it, it falls apart. See what I'm saying? And it's the same thing with ourselves and our deen on the individual level. If we're not on top of it, it falls apart. It's the same thing with our children. I'm not saying to the point of suffocating them, but we have to keep reminding them gently. And the Prophet ﷺ, that's what he's going to do for 20-something years. But what can happen in a situation? We talked about stress, right? We talked about the issue of stress. What can happen if you're not retreating back to kind of take the time to breathe and to reflect and to look at the bigger picture? What can happen? Anybody?
Exhausted, burnout.
Yeah.
Burnout.
What does that mean, exhausted, burnout?
You are in the chaos.
Really, Drake, what did you say?
You are in the chaos, right?
What does that mean?
That means when you're in a chaotic environment, the decision that's coming up, or whatever the thinking that's coming out, it's not going to be in a focused manner or in a.
So, do we agree that we need to take a break at times?
Yeah.
What type of, but okay, so in the prophetic model, the Prophet ﷺ took a break, connected with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Simplified a little bit. When we say we need a break, what kind of breaks? Like, what are we doing on that break? Some of us, we go on vacation, we need vacation from the vacation. But what are we doing on the break? See what I'm saying? That's the important piece. And in da'wah in general, or just working in the community, I'm telling you from my experience, 20-something years of working with the community, if you don't take a break, you'll be forced to take the break. You'll be forced to take the break. The other thing that comes up here is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was he alone?
No. He had Khadijah.
Yeah. He had support. What we call Am al-Huzn, or the year of sorrow, it comes up in Sirah, it comes up in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In part, that was because the support of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Was it only Khadijah? He had his uncle. They passed away. And something very interesting in that point is that Khadijah became Muslim. I don't want to get into the debate about the status of the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad in the hereafter. It's not my concern. That's between Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and Abi Talib. But from what we know at face value, did Abi Talib become Muslim? From what we know at face value, no. And this is important for us in this environment. Why? Because one of the greatest supporters of Islam was who? Was it a Muslim? It was a non-Muslim. It's a non-Muslim. Right? So we have to be careful what our attitude is. Because just like people construct attitudes about us and ideas about us and stereotypes about us, we can construct the same stereotypes and same ideas. And it could be about people that are really in our favor and in support of what is just, what is right, you know. And in our dealings, we have to deal with that. Just like on the other side, it can be people that are against us. And they can, for instance, Abu Lahab, he was from the family of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the first instinct is family. You know, we protect family, but this is a destructive individual. See what I'm saying? So in this reality, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had that support from Khadija. And that's something that I want to say to husband and wife. Because here is Khadija supporting the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this regard, as he goes to the cave of Hira. But it's also in the reverse, the husband supporting the wife. You know what I'm saying? The same principle is there. That's necessary for balance to take place. That's necessary for balance to take place. The other thing that comes up in the background of this is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala reveals Surah Al-Muzammil. Surah Al-Mudaththir, it gives the command to rise and warn, right? It's like the command to be engaged in the da'wah. The command to be in the struggle, so to speak, with the people in the society. But Surah Al-Muzammil is realizing the state of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He goes to Khadija when he encounters Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. Jibreel reveals the first 5 ayat of Surah Al-Alaq. We reflected on 2 of them. It also calls us to reflect upon the greater reality of the creation. But after the first few ayat are revealed, the Prophet ﷺ is overwhelmed. It's a new experience. Revelation is a heavy reality, right? Stop and think about what that means. Part of revelation is, a good portion of it is not only Tawheed, but for us as human beings, think about what that really means. The reality of revelation. What is it really talking? A good portion of that is that life has a purpose, it has a meaning. But where is the significance of death? What comes after death? That unseen reality. When we talk about al-khalq, or the creation, that has everything to do with life and death, and the beginning of it, and the sustenance of it, and the meaning of it, and the direction of it, and so on and so forth. The Prophet is taking this and absorbing it for the first time. And it's this voice coming from nowhere. You know what I'm saying? Not only that, a voice, but the Prophet ﷺ sees Jibreel ﷺ. That was overwhelming. And the Prophet ﷺ questions himself. He just didn't accept it. He questioned himself, and he was in that state for a while. Like, what is this? And Khadija was the one that supported him in that process. Khadija supported him in that process. So one of the things that we get from that, if the Prophet ﷺ questioned himself in that moment, then what about us? Do we question ourselves? The other thing that we get from that is that when we start talking about the issue, for instance, of knowledge and responsibility and wanting things to change and all of this that comes along with that, is going to demand that we question ourselves. Because that's the beginning of the da'wah, that's the earliest phase. After that, you see the reality of Mecca, you see the reality of Medina, and then we're the children of that reality. We're the children, we the Muslim Ummah are the children of that early reality. See what I'm saying? But there's lessons in that leadership, it comes with a heavy responsibility. There's no doubt about that it comes with a heavy responsibility. So to carry that, the Quran comes and gives consolation to the Prophet Muhammad, tasliyah. It takes care of his heart, how he feels. It's not just a book of rules. Comes and takes care of how he feels. He's feeling lost. He's feeling scared. Alayhi salatu wasalam. Ya ayyuhal muzammil. Oh, you who are wrapped up. He wrapped himself up out of fear. He wanted some security. Right? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. After that experience with Jibreel, قُمَ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. And this is an important piece, which is difficult. Right? Here's the command to look for Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala in the night. And this remains with the Prophet ﷺ for the whole of his life. For the Ummah, it was only for a period of time that tahajjud was mandatory. And that's from the mercy of Allah Ta'ala, because we became obligated to pray 5 times a day. But then it just became encouraged to pray in the deep part of the night where no one can see us, right? But the Prophet ﷺ sustained himself with that reality. It was his break that he can take at any time without having to what? Without having to leave to another place. See what I'm saying? It's the break that we all can take when life is overwhelming. And it's that time period where we're by ourselves. And in the middle of the night like that, it's a time period where you feel tranquility and peace, and so on and so forth. You don't hear, the vehicles outside. There's the children are not crying. The phone is not ringing. You see, it's a time period of tranquility which we can seek Allah Ta'ala. And the Prophet ﷺ is commanded, even if it's just a little bit. Some of the scholars, how do they handle that? And understanding that I say, okay, for instance, if you wake up for Fajr, you can wake up a few more minutes early, right before the Adhan, and you can catch that time period. And it's something that we have to analyze within ourselves. Where are we with Salah itself? Salah is weighty, is difficult. But Salah itself, it was given to us, and Salah comes from that word is sila, to have a connection with Allah Ta'ala. It's not just a Salah, for instance, people, how is it that we teach our children Salah? We teach it to them as it's something weighty. We deal with Salah as it's something weighty. But Salah didn't come to like 13 years. First the Quran was being revealed, and then the 13th year, the command to Salah came. So the first thing is to have, the right orientation towards life, how we think about life. And the lesson that we get here is that Allah Ta'ala is sustaining us. That's what we want to leave with today. Allah Ta'ala is Rabbul Alameen. And more than that, Allah Ta'ala is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. There's only one surah in the Quran that doesn't begin like that, in Surah At-Tawbah. And even there's some debate amongst a minority of scholars that claim that Surah At-Tawbah is part of Surah Al-Anfal. That's not the majority view. But I always say that to emphasize the point that the Quran is constantly reminding us of who Allah Ta'ala is and the nature of the world. Because in a capitalist, money-oriented, materialistic system that's global, human being does not have value. You don't have value unless you have money. You have status, and you have this, and you have that. But that's in the world of humans. Yes, we have to deal with that. But in the big picture, with Allah Ta'ala, the human being has ranking. And the role of the Muslim in civilization and in the world and in history and in this time period is to bring that meaning back. What made Western civilization strong after all of its problems of colonialism and this and that was raising the status of the human being. And was crushing civilization now in the world is the human being status is lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And the Prophet ﷺ, to address that reality, went to the cave of Hira. To address the reality of who is the human being. And when we look in the past, both Surah Al-Fil and Surah Quraysh, we have to realize that those are reminders to Quraysh. The Quran is reminding Quraysh of what Allah did for them. How Allah Ta'ala rescued Quraysh during the time of Surah Al-Fil, when the Prophet ﷺ was young, from the Kaaba being overtaken. But Surah Al-Quraysh itself, and we talked a little bit about that when we talked about Li-Ilafi Quraysh. Ilaf It goes back to Hashim, who was one of the ancestors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Hashim, as we mentioned before, we talked a little bit about this, and Wadah Khanfar in the book The First Spring, we're not going to touch that right now, is going to come up with more detail, but he deals with that possibly the best that I've ever seen. Because he shows that the ancestors of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Quraysh itself, the reason why Quraysh had become powerful was not because an individual or two individuals became powerful, but because in that time period where Hashim was alive, he decided that he was going to care for the community. He decided that it was not possible that Quraysh could have its own people dying outside of Mecca due to poverty, humility, and all that type of stuff. So he reorganized the community. And later on, we see that in Islam under zakat. Zakat becomes that system of uplifting the poor, the right of the poor. It's not charity as we see. Sadaqah is charity. Zakat is not charity. Zakat is a reminder to us that as Muslims, we can't have a society, we can't have a community, we can't have families in which some of us are doing excellent and great and we show off about that, and then others are left in destruction. Like, that's just not the way of the Muslim. Maybe the way of the world, and maybe the way some Muslims act, but it's not the way of Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ is coming out of that background, right? Is coming out of that background. So the retreat, it was there as a medicine, right? It was there as a medicine. And for us, it's not the same as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the scholars, they looked at the cave of Hira, and eventually we have, what do we have every year? We have i'tikaf. That's what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed with. But at any time, to retreat is something that is encouraged. When you come into the masjid, you make the niyyah, you make the intention. You calculate how long you're going to be in the masjid. See, I make the intention of i'tikaf from this time to this time. So you get the reward, but also you in that state. We mentioned the same thing with tahajjud. It's a time of retreat, right? It's a time of retreating. And we mentioned the state that the Prophet ﷺ went into the retreat. He went into the state of concern for others. But one of the things that's important for us to understand is when we go into the retreat, it's not just to think about our own perfection and our own happiness and so on, but to have a sense of gratitude. When you look at the big picture of things, and I think we were having this conversation here in this masjid, a couple of us. If you look at now, you look at the Muslim community, we may have problems with each other, whatever. We may say, the Muslim community, subhanAllah. I'm guilty of saying that myself. But when you look at the big picture, and you look at where things were at before, 20, 30 years ago, and the sacrifices that people made, and you see where things are at now, where you look at 50 years ago, you see some progress. That big picture thinking, it allows you to what? Have a sense of gratitude. Same thing with the marriage. When you think about the big picture, how much we struggled and we suffered and this, that, and you start having gratitude. And we teach that to our children. It's a different mindset. So when we take that time for us to renew, which I say everyone needs to take that time, especially when you're struggling, we go in with that gratitude. But also, when we go into that state of self-renewal, we think about the mercy of Allah Ta'ala, and we think about forgiveness. That's what we do in Ramadan, people. And the reality of Ramadan is we're seeking forgiveness from Allah. That's why we are isolating ourselves. And we should come out with a sense of empathy and love. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. That's the Quranic description of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Almost to say that nubuwwah itself is that the Prophet ﷺ was not commissioned, was not sent, was not chosen, was not commanded to go out, except to be a mercy to all of the creation, or to the human beings and the jinns, but we can say all of the creation. In this time period, all of the creation needs mercy. Human beings are no longer taking care of the earth and the environment. We're no longer thinking about future generations. We're destroying the environment. And if we are able to go into space, we'll destroy out there as well. Because the qualities of Khilafah are not there. Khilafah, in this case, it means the steward, the ones that is given the responsibility. Human beings are very powerful, like we mentioned, but with limitation. Human beings were given the creation as a responsibility to take care of it, to cultivate it, to raise the dhikr of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. Right? That's what that's the ahad, or the contract, or the agreement that we have with Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. And that was taken in the time when we were in the loins of Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. When we bore witness that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala is one, we testified to Allah, all humanity. But not everyone lives out of that reality. So the retreat mode is there for that. And like we mentioned, in Surah Al-Muzammil, we see that the Prophet ﷺ is commanded to take a portion of the night. So the encounter with revelation in the cave of Hira, when Surah Al-Alaq was revealed, was a heavy experience. But we all need to come back to that. Like, what is the purpose of life? It's easy to say, well, the purpose of life is that we worship Allah. Well, what does that entail? What does that mean? What does that mean on an everyday basis? What does that mean in my interactions with my relatives and my co-workers? What does it mean in life itself? And we're going to realize that it's a heavy experience. And from there, we need a sense of renewal. And that's where Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala gives us a way out. And saying, call me in the middle of the night. Where are those that are going to call? Right? That's based on the Hadith Qudsi, where Allah is seeking us. In the Hadith Qudsi, Allah is seeking us. And Allah is telling us what is the best time in that regard. What is the best time to come. And the third part of the night is designated. Outside of that, the sujood in salah is designated as one of those moments in which the servant of Allah is the most closest. And then we have the ayah of the Quran, "Ad'uni astajib lakum." Call out to me and I will respond to you. Right? Those are signs of Allah loving us, and having a demonstration of mercy and coming more to us than we come to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And with that, we come to an end, people. Does anybody have any comments or responses? Or
Just one thing.
Fadl.
No, it's okay. Yeah, regarding the whole retreat, right? Even in Ramadan, we do i'tikaf in
Right.
masjid. There are certain sects that go for 3 days away from the family,
Right.
going for maybe like 40 days.
Right.
Not. I mean, you're supposed to take care of your family, right?
Mhm.
By going away, by disconnecting yourself, aren't we doing a disservice to your family?
That particular approach is seen in Jamaat al-Tabligh. And sometimes what happens is that the people who engage the idea don't understand it fully. Like many times what happens with many ideas and many concepts. So originally they built a system to support each other. It's just like the Khadija experience. Khadija supports the Prophet ﷺ. He goes out. That's the idea. But what happens a lot of times is that concept is not there. so the support system breaks down. And then it becomes something else, right? It becomes something else. And sometimes some people use that experience as a getaway. It's not, there's different people with different intentions, different reasons, right? But of course, we have to have balance. The family issue is a responsibility. But some people need that for their own renewal. See what I'm saying? They're not in a good condition. So everybody's not at the same level as that, because I've seen doctors go out and for them, they go out because, after they have so many experiences, so many long work hours, so much money being made, they feel, I need that renewal. But that's different than like a poor person that's in the struggle, so to speak. You see what I'm saying? That needs to build other skills, right? But we also don't want to knock, people's efforts, but it's not balance. We just need to encourage the balance.
What do you suggest for somebody whose support system is the thing that's overwhelming?
That's where still you have to take a break. See what I'm saying? You have to be honest with yourself that is what is taking place. What's supposed to be my support system is not there. That's where you have to analyze the situation, and then you have to say to yourself, okay, what can I do to put myself in a better position? Not necessarily you, but whoever's in that situation, right? What do I need to do to put myself in a position where either my tolerance level goes up, or I'm at a point where I'm not in the state of emergency or the state of alert, or the state in which I'm just in constant anxiety. See what I'm saying? Because that's what happens. And that's why we paused on this from this angle, because we know that that's going on. So many of us are going through that. It's not a unique situation. See what I'm saying? It's not a situation I'm going to say, well, the brother who's asking the question is the one well, most of us are going through stuff like that. Most of us are going through stuff like that. But the thing is, like, if we don't, sometimes it requires for the whole thing to fall apart. So bad that it just has to fall apart. That could be in work, it could be in a family situation. Sometimes you have to let it completely fall apart. But the important thing is, like the concept, أُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, that I resign my fear to Allah. Yes, that's not strategic planning, you know what I'm saying? That's not like al-akhdh bil asbab, so to speak, that I'm going by the cause and effect. Sometimes life is that way. And sometimes it's meant to be that way so that we know who Allah is, right? And we say, La ilaha illallah. Wasn't that the experience of Yunus alayhi salatu wasalam? Didn't Yunus reach a point where Yunus, had to just submit? Yunus alayhi salatu wasalam, he stated that it's you, Allah, that are perfect. And indeed, I'm from the wrongdoers. Right? Life hit that point where Yusuf's experience was not like that, though. No matter what Yusuf went through, alayhi salatu wasalam, the way that he navigated was like, it's something that needs to be studied. But we all don't have that quality, right? That's why the lives of the prophets are important, because we can see every situation is like that, right? That comes up in life, that's difficult. Every situation that comes up in life, that is of the core situations, not every detail, but the core life situations that human beings go through. We can see that in the lives of the prophets. The Prophet Muhammad and his companions, they reached the point, Mata Nasrullah. When will the help of Allah come? Right? And when you read the ayah, you have to read it with that emotion, like, we're overwhelmed. It's too much. There's people that say that, I'm up to capacity. I'm beyond capacity at this point. That's fine to say that. And there's a lot of Muslims like that. That's fine. That's not a defect in Iman or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? To say, I'm beyond capacity. Right. But there are some things that also need to be done, for instance, at the practical level. Like sleeping properly. Right? Like eating properly. Why? Because the human body has its limitations. Right? But a person may feel like it's too much. That's why we say we surrender to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But how you begin to help yourself is some of that. Also talking to someone, right? Salah is extremely important. Firstly, talking to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, but talking to another human being as well. Right? That's key. Mental health is real, people. It may not have been an issue 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Society was completely different. The support system, the family system was there. See what I'm saying? But mental illness and all of that stuff is very real because the modern world has created those types of problems. But as Muslims, we have to have that balance, right? Because also, everything that's coming from the mental health industry is not necessarily the best, but that doesn't mean we reject it. We have to use it, as much as we can. But also, we have to use our deen. And part of that is taking time for ourselves. See what I'm saying? Exercising, taking care of our bodies, not allowing my stress and all of that. But it comes, right? It comes. Does that make sense? Or do the sisters have any comments or any chiming in?
I think it's a mindset also, where we can't feel like we're being judged because we are putting ourselves first in order to be the best version of ourselves. It's a guilt trip on ourselves. So it's a mindset that we have to accept, and it's a little hard.
Women are taught to put themselves before everybody. I'm sorry, put everybody before themselves. And sometimes it's expected. Not that men don't have that either, because men are taught, forget about how you feel, that type of thing. And that does have its role. Like, as men, if we get too emotional, it's a mess. So we can't get too emotional. But culturally, sometimes women are taught to suffer in silence. That doesn't mean that men are not taught to suffer in silence. But here, I wanted to focus on the issue of women. And that's dangerous. A few years ago, actually it hasn't been a few years, maybe almost 7 years back. In Texas, there were 50 people that committed suicide in the Muslim community. Now, mind you, Texas has one of the largest Muslim communities with mental health professionals and all of that. And one of the most, emphasized, or one of the most notable cases was some moms. Right? So it's not an issue of putting yourself first, it's the issue of doing what's necessary, which is different, right? Doing what's necessary in order to sustain yourself. Right? Because if you say putting yourself first, then that brings guilt. Because you feel like, I'm putting myself before it. And some of us we've trained ourselves to say, well, no, I shouldn't put myself first. So we start fighting ourselves. No, it's do what's necessary in order for you to sustain yourself, in order for you to be able to function. Just like they say, the famous example about if you're on the plane, they say, well, you have to put the oxygen mask on first. Yes. But there's no doubt that there's occasions which people will say, forget the oxygen mask. I have to do what needs to be done and sacrifice to the next level for the sake of everyone else. It's true, that's there. But the average person, that's not what is being asked of them. You see what I'm saying? And we have to just be really honest. What is our limit? And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gives us that example. The Quran is telling us to take that time out. Yes, it's saying in the form of salah here, but the meaning, the maqsad is that take that time out. Like if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to sustain. Right? And that's what I say to everyone that becomes active in the community. If you don't take the time out, and the community has to say it's okay. Take your limit. take your break, do what you need to do. Same thing with husbands and wives. Wives and husbands have to give that space to the other person, especially in anger, right? In anger, you have to allow the other person to retreat. Some examples are not that way. What do? When a person is angry and the conversation is heightened, we pursue. We want to keep pursuing and making the point. And the environment is not the environment. It has to be an environment which is an environment of de-escalation. It's the same thing when you're overworked and stressed out. If you see that you're overworked and stressed out and you keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, it's going to end up in a heart attack. It's going to end up in a car crash because you're too sleepy. It's going to end up in some issues. So you have to say, no, I have my limit. I'll give you an example and I'll kind of bring it down to a close. If you're trained as a professional driver, they tell you a certain point, they say, if you reach a certain point of sleepiness, don't think that the coffee and the radio and the air conditioner and all of that is going to settle. You have to do what? Huh? Yes, you have to stop. And if you don't stop, you're going to be responsible for your own destruction and maybe somebody else's. That's the message that we want to get through today. Did you want to say something? You wanted to say something?
Yes. It just Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he married Khadija radiallahu anha, he was 25.
Yes.
And he got the message when he was 40.
Yes.
Those 15 years, I mean, was a hint that for him to go to Ghar Hira, I mean, what? I read a lot of books and I couldn't find any resource that why he went to Ghar Hira, and just was anything that
He developed and some of them are mixed the way that they write about that, but he developed a love for solitude. It was ilham, min bab al-ilham. He was inspired to that solitude.
But he was a religion before.
Well, remember that we usually say the Arabs, there was no concept of Arabs as we think. That came with nationalism, right? But those were the children of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. So some of them were Hunafa, right? People of Tawheed. They had some understanding. And you see that there's some examples there. The non-Muslim scholars try to say that some of those people from those tribes, which they call the Arabs later on, right? They say that they took from the people of the book. And they try to say that. Or they were taking from the people of the book and so on and so forth. But the people of the book didn't care about the condition of those people there. And so, yes, there were people that had some impact because they were from the people of the book. But the reality here, what we know of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that it was the Hunafa were there, right? That reality of fitra and that reality of what they knew from Ibrahim was had an impact. But the people of the book themselves deviated from Ibrahim, some of them. What did you say?
The uncle of Khadija radiallahu anha, has any effect on him? Waraq ibn Nawfal?
From what we see in the Sirah books, he recognized the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
That's it.
That's it. And the argument that what he took from we see the reality of the Quran. The Quran is a clear proof of what the Quranic message is. See what I'm saying?
Earlier the talk spoke about the non-Muslims, how they may be supporting us or how do you say a lot of times when we're marching or when we're having a protest or something like that, we're sending alongside people of a certain lifestyle who are focused on that lifestyle. How do you balance that? Because a lot of times people are supportive of Muslims or Islam, but they just, how do you stand with that? With flags waving,
Yeah, that needs a more extensive conversation.
Because a lot of times when we go up for dawah, they are the biggest.
Right.
And so it's just hard for us, how do we,
Yes. So let's call the adhan for. So after Maghrib, inshallah. Yeah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله